Hello, my name is Tendai Manombo and this is RealTalk. On the 27th of June 2022, the Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Mthuli Ncube, announced new economic measures aimed at stabilizing the exchange rate, promoting availability of basic commodities, and improving conditions of service for civil servants. Today we have Zvikomborero Sibanda to help us unpack the announcement. Zvikomborero is an economic analyst at the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development. At ZimCod, he is responsible for research and evidence gathering, economic policy analysis, and economic modeling. Before joining ZimCod, he was an economic analyst at Equity Access, a Harare-based economic and equities research firm. He holds both a Master of Science and Bachelor of Science degrees in economics from the University of Zimbabwe. Zvikomborero has more than 4 years' experience in research and economic analysis. His research interests are in public debt, development finance, monetary economics, and macroeconomics. Please stay tuned for more. All right, welcome to our second segment. Here we're talking about the measures that the Minister of Finance announced early this week. And we are just talking here with Zvikomborero from ZimCod. Now, Zvikom, please just explain to us to what extent these measures address the issue of inflation, because that is the biggest issue bedeviling our economy. How are these measures addressing directly the issue of inflation?
This is a good question. If we look, what are the major drivers of inflation? Because recently the government has been actually accusing businesses and individuals of speculative and arbitrary behaviors. Rent-seeking behavior in the economy. But if you look at the major drivers from statistics, official statistics, you can actually see that money supply or Zim dollar liquidity remains high in the economy, because if you look at check statistics, broad money is actually increasing by 100% month on month, year on year. So it means that government fiscal indiscipline has been the major driver of inflation in Zimbabwe. So if I look on these measures, you can see that do we have anything offered which is addressing fiscal indiscipline? You can actually see that there's nothing which is being offered, no policy change towards that end. So that that's one point. Then secondly, you can look.
But didn't they say that it's now illegal for businesses to quote or do business a percentum above the interbank rate?
Yes, they said 10% above the interbank rate, but why I'm saying I'm worried about it, because look, as long as the government is grip or is controlling the dynamics in the interbank system, to actually have an efficient market or a true market exchange rate, we need actually to allow market forces to operate, just float the interbank, the exchange rate, so that forces of demand and supply determine the exchange rate. So that's why I'm saying I'm worried, because I don't see the government actually going that route to actually float the Zimbabwean dollar to address that issue. So that's why I said that's from that front. Then second, look, Tendai, there are issues around corruption. We know that the government announced that we are having record foreign currency earnings from exports as well as diaspora remittances, etc. But if you look, we are struggling. I mean, we are facing current shortages. Why? Because of issues around corruption. Corruption is rampant even if you look on Auditor General's reports yearly, they indicate massive abuse and diversion of public resources for private gain.
Yes.
So we need measures which address issues around corruption. Thirdly, you can look issues around illicit financial flows. We have, for example, the mining sector. Mining sector is the backbone of the Zimbabwean economy because if you look, it is actually contributing more than 60% to our forex receipts from exports. So it means that if we harness the potential of this sector, we can actually solve some of our problems, existing problems.
All right.
But if you look from that market, there's too much illicit financial flows. Recently, the government announced that they are losing at least 100 million per month from gold smuggling alone. So it means that we are, as a nation, we are losing at least 1.2 billion per year in terms of gold smuggling alone. We are not talking of other minerals like nickel, diamonds, what has been reported by the Auditor General in terms of... That's a lot of revenues which are losing. So we have, the measures are not actually addressing those leakages such as illicit financial flows we are experiencing in Zimbabwe. So we have corruption, we have illicit financial flows. Also, Tendai, if you look around issues of public debt, public debt has been driven by actually fiscal indiscipline. Fiscal indiscipline has been driving public debt in Zimbabwe. And the latest statistics actually showing us that our public and publicly guaranteed debt is now something like over 17 billion from the 2020 level of 10.7 billion. So it means the growth in public debt is actually now unsustainable. Zimbabwe is now in debt distress, and there are effects of unsustainable debt. For instance, unsustainable debt actually it constrains the fiscal policies. Also, it also reduces in business investment, economic growth, because it actually results in heightened long-term interest rates, tax rates, and inflation.
And at the end of the day, the taxpayers are the ones that are being nailed for this.
Exactly. So from that front, also another issue which I expect government to also address some structural rigidities which are existing in our economy. For example, and these structural rigidities are actually resulting in price distortions. And so you would expect the government to actually address these structural rigidities. How can they do that? If you look from the mantra of the government is engagement and re-engagement. And if you look, our creditors and the international community has been calling for government to actually seriously implement reforms, political and economic reforms. So I'm not going to dwell on political reforms, but I'll just say I was expecting at least some progress around issues of implementation of economic reforms. For instance, our parastatals. Our parastatals are loss-making, they are draining the fiscus. So we need to actually, if you look, the TSP which was introduced in October 2018, the Transitional Stabilization Plan, it was actually seeking to institute some of these parastatal reforms. But you look up to this day, these reforms are yet to be implemented. And recently, there was an article in Zimbabwean Independent actually addressing this issue that the lack of implementation is actually due to existence of some bigwigs, political bigwigs, which actually against this implementation of this parastatal because they are benefiting from it. So you can actually see that this lack of political will to implement serious reforms to actually reconfigure our economy to now become a market-driven rather than a command-driven economy. So all these issues I have been expecting government, the measures I was expecting Ntuli to announce measures to address issues around corruption, debt, illicit financial flows, structural rigidities, and fiscal indiscipline, but I have never seen a single measure actually being offered to address this. So it means that the government is not yet serious in actually addressing the problems we are having at hand.
So can we conclude then that the measures that were announced are redundant?
Yes, I can actually say that the measures are, yes, there are some which actually are progressive. If you look around issues of, say, a reduction in levies, government levies on fuel, I think something which we have been calling over these past years, because even before the war in Ukraine, Tendai, Zimbabwe had the highest fuel prices in the SADC region. So it means that these problems goes beyond the Russia-Ukraine war. So it means that we have been, yes, it's correct that they've reduced levies on diesel to zero. But there are also other challenges around the fuel sector. For example, let's look Tendai, for example, the ethanol sector. We are blending our fuel using ethanol. Petrol is blended with ethanol. If we are now on E15, 15% ethanol.
And the blending is meant to make the fuel cheaper.
But if you look now, as we are increasing the blending, the price of petrol is also rising. Why? Because the ethanol sector is actually a monopoly, because there's a single seller of that precious commodity, which is ethanol. I read, I think 2 months ago, where I read that it is actually cheaper for one to import, let's say, a liter of ethanol as far as from Brazil and sell it in Zimbabwe at a cheaper price than the ethanol we are having here at home. So it means the ethanol market is actually contributing to the price increases which you are experiencing right now. So I was expecting also government to address that issue of ethanol prices in Zimbabwe. Also, even the market as a whole, if you look, this is about importing and retailing. We have few large importers who are also major participants in the fuel retailing industry. And this actually distorts the pricing in the market. So the measures have been not addressing all those issues. So we are having a challenge here, and I think the government, from what they offered up to this day, it's actually not addressing the challenges at hand.
The real issues. Okay,
Yes.
So I just want to go back on the issue of gold. Please just help us understand what the professor meant when he talked about the gold coins. What does that mean for the odd person? What does that announcement mean, really?
Thank you, Tendai. The gold issues around gold coins were announced by the Reserve Bank through its monetary policy committee, where they say that the central bank is going to introduce gold coins, and this will be minted by Fidelity Gold refineries there. And you can actually buy these coins in the normal banking channels. That's what the MPC announced. So from my understanding is this, a gold coin is just it can be mostly or it can be purely gold coin, which is oro. It can be actually a gold coated coin, but with an more like a derivative with
The high value.
No, with gold, actual physical gold, a gold coated coin backed by actual or physical gold at the vaults at the central bank.
All right.
So usually in other countries everywhere, these gold coins actually for storing value. Yes, from that end. But here's my worry with this issue in Zimbabwe. They are yet to announce or to tell us the modalities around the issues of gold coins. So it's a bit challenging to actually comment from that end. But from my understanding of the status quo, I know that this is actually going to fail. Why? Because I don't remember in 2014 when we introduced the bond coins, they say that these bond coins were actually backed by a 200 million Afrexim bank loan, and the market believed them. That the bond coins actually begged. So we started to use bond coins, but later we realized that the statements were actually misleading or on false. So now, now in 2022, they are now coming again with issues around gold coins, saying that you actually trade. But I think if you look from the government, is actually facing forex shortages, and I also you have to take note that we are actually mortgaging our minerals. Recently, Bloomberg revealed that we are paying about more than 250 million to Trafigura for loans, fuel loans that were actually incurred in 2019 during the time of 1:1. So we are now paying that 250 million loan using proceeds from gold and nickel. So considering all this, that we are selling we are now paying some of our loans using precious metals like gold.
Yes.
So it means that where will the government or the RBZ get enough gold to actually keep in its vault to sell in the local market at local price or in Zim dollar prices? I think that one is going to be a challenging task for them, because consider that we have resource-backed loans in Zimbabwe. So it means some of the gold, some of the nickel is actually paying the loans which have been
already held up.
You see now. So, and also the status quo is showing us that the government is facing, shortages of foreign currency. So now to say, how will the RBZ raise reserves in form of gold to back these gold coins, something which I don't think will hold water.
Right. Okay. There are various inconsistencies here.
Yes, there are various inconsistencies because issues around lack of transparency, especially in contracting loans by government. We end up, like for example, it was actually reviewed recently that you are paying paying fuel for 2019 using gold. So it's something which shows lack of transparency in public finance management in Zimbabwe.
True. All right, we're just going to take another short break and we'll finish up this conversation. In this episode, we're talking about the measures that Professor Mthuli Ncube announced to just curb the issue of the runaway inflation. Tell us, Zviko, what is Zimcod's position in light of the minister's announcements?
Oh, thank you, Tendai. In light of the minister's announcement, we can actually, our position is that the measures which have been offered by government are not actually addressing issues which are affecting poor citizens who are majority of this nation. Because if you look, why are we worried on that? Recently, latest statistics are released by the World Bank actually showing that about 6.4 million Zimbabweans are actually living in poverty, extreme poverty, like they are earning less than $1.90 per day. They are living on less than $0.90 per day. So it means the current situation is actually entrenched the population in a vicious cycle of poverty. And our position is that government should actually come up with good measures. Like we need policy consultations from government, not just a top-down approach, but government should actually come and consult with all stakeholders, the business community, civil society, citizens, and the general public in terms of issues around policies. Because what we are seeing, that's why we are seeing now the minister is actually throwing statements. The central bank and the treasurer actually throwing press releases every day. It shows that the policies they are implementing actually not addressing the problems at the end. So what we are just calling is government should actually have that political will. I mean, the officials in government should have political will to implement needed and necessary reforms, political and economic reforms, to actually stabilize this economy. Without these reforms, I tell you, Tendai, that we will never de-dollarize the economy. Because if you look on history, you can actually see all those countries that dollarized before, they actually faced the problems to de-dollarize up until they started to implement market-driven, prudent policies. So what we are saying is, Zimcode saying, we need now not only rhetoric, but we need implementation of reforms to actually stabilize, to address the root causes of our problems at hand. Until we have that political will to implement necessary reforms, I'm telling you that we will remain in this cycle forever.
And it will just get worse.
It will just get worse. So we are saying as Zimco, the government should actually embrace and implement serious economic and structural reforms to actually reduce or remove market distortion, pricing distortions which are existing and which are exacting prices in Zimbabwe.
All right. Okay. Well, that was very thorough. That you answered the questions very thoroughly, and I'm pretty sure our viewers have a better understanding of the measures now that they were announced. Now, on this show, we play a game. So what happens is that the last guest, a guest will ask a question to the guest coming in the next episode, and then in turn that guest asks another question. So what's going to happen? I'm going to ask you the question that was asked by our previous guest. Nothing too difficult, really. So you can ask on anything. All right.
Yes.
So this guest asked on the issue of climate change and said that Zimbabwe is not doing enough really on the issue of sustainability. And the actual question is, what are your suggestions on how we can get young people involved in issues to do with sustainability?
That was from the previous guest.
Yes.
Okay. Issues. Yes, I agree that in Zimbabwe we are actually lagging behind issues of climate change. In terms of coming up with climate change mitigation and adaptation measures. So to actually let the young people get involved in this, you can see that the young people constitute the youth. They are constituting more than 60% of our total population. So it means that if we have the participation of the youth, we can actually address some of the problems we are facing as a nation. So in my view, to actually ensure that the youth participate in climate change or in sustainability issues, we need actually government to introduce policies which are actually biased towards the youth. And these policies, such as government introduce community-based irrigation schemes where the youth actually participate in irrigation, farming using climate smart agriculture, like community irrigations. We can also come up with initiatives such as issues around because we know that to fight climate change, we need actually the natural environment, particularly trees, because forests are carbon sinks. They actually absorb the carbon dioxide release. So we need also initiatives like youth initiatives, which are actually focusing on reforestation in Zimbabwe, having those in youth in their villages, in their districts, in their wards, being supported financially by the government or their local authorities to actually engage in those reforestation initiatives. Also around the issues of climate, what else can we say from issues around climate? The youth need actually to be supported, as I said, financially to address these issues. And these policies should actually also take into consideration that the gender disparities, they need only not to be, and all policies in Zimbabwe, they end up actually benefiting, the men and boys. So the policies should actually also ensure that there's just gender parity in terms of implementation or awarding of loans or any other state help.
Yes, okay, you're right. And I think in addition to that, one of the first things that the government should do really is to just inform the youth, because a lot of people are uninformed on the issues of global warming. They're uninformed and incapacitated too on even how they can help. Small things like what you're saying, planting trees and just being informed, actively engaging in the issues and in the problem solving, that is lacking. So I think information dissemination is lacking as well.
Yeah. We need also information dissemination so that the youth become active in this.
Just an awareness campaign. So what's your question to our next guest?
Thank you. I raised a question around issues of public debt because I have a strong interest in public debt. If you look, our debt is ballooning. Now we are now over 17 billion, which is almost 100% of our national output.
It's increasing.
And it's increasing at an alarming pace. So my question to the next guest is how can we actually how can the citizens contribute to ensure that the government take the issues around debt seriously? Because I'm worried with the rate at which the debt is rising. So how can we come up with measures or policies to ensure that we curb unsustainable debt in Zimbabwe?
All right. Thank you very much. I'm sure our guest is going to answer that question as best as they can. Thank you so much to our viewers for joining us this week. You know, it's been a very interesting topic that people have been discussing. And we really hope you learned a lot. We really hope some of your questions have been answered. And please join us once again next week.